in the Italian language, when you say something is expensive, when you want to say something is expensive, you say the price is very salato, which means salty. And you normally do it with doing this with your fingers, which is weird, isn't it? But if you do it the other way around, it starts making sense. If you're like me, you may be wondering what are those heaps of white stuff just behind me. And before you say anything, no, it's nothing illegal. Actually, these are heaps of salt. I am in one of the most evocative and iconic places next to the city of Trapani in Sicily. I am visiting its salt pans. A salt pan, I found out today, is an undrained natural depression in which water gathers and leaves a deposit of salt on evaporation. What you see behind me now are some basins that are flooded with seawater at the beginning of each season, and that water is left there to evaporate, and what's left behind, the sediment, is pure salt, the salt that you use to cook. Salt in this area has been produced in this way for over 3,000 years. In fact, this was the place where, at the times of the Roman Empire, the most expensive salt of the empire was produced. Salt was so important in the Roman society that Roman soldiers were paid with salt. Indeed, the Latin word for salt is sal, and Roman soldiers were paid a salarium. And I think you know where I'm going with this. Clearly, the English word salary comes from that. Salt always played a very important role in the Italian society. Just think that until 1973, only the state was allowed to sell salt. It was a monopoly of the state. And only in 1973 the market was liberalized, and the taxes, the high taxes that the state used to charge on salt were waived. However, those taxes were waived earlier in Sicily, where I am, than they were on the mainland. Just think that in Sicily, 1 kilogram of salt was 15 liras, while on the mainland it was 90 liras. Lira, by the way, is the currency we had before the euro. That actually started a huge process of smuggling salt from this island, from Sicily, to the mainland. However, when the tax in 1973, the tax was waived. And the reason why it was waived, it's certainly not because the state wanted to do something nice for the people. Absolutely not. The reason was that the income from that tax really decreased, simply because the 1970s, 1960s, 1970s really, were the years when refrigerators, fridges and freezers started being popular in this country. Which means that people did no longer need salt to preserve their foods, and it became only something you used to cook. So clearly the income from that tax got very, very low. So there was no longer any use or need to impose that tax that clearly didn't bring much money to the state. However, many expressions in the Italian language nowadays are based on the conception that salt was a very expensive and luxury good. For example, in the Italian language, when you say something is expensive, when you want to say something is expensive, you say the price is very salato, which means salty. And you normally do it with doing this with your fingers, which is weird, isn't it? But if you do it the other way around, it starts making sense. It's like putting salt, right? Which means, clearly, you're implying that Since you've put salt on it, it became very expensive. And that's why we say salato. So, only visiting this place, I've learned so much about my country and the importance of salt. And it's funny because nowadays, when you think of salt, you try to avoid that, right? It's something you don't want to have in your food. I mean, just the right amount. But back in the day, oh God, the more salt you had, the luckier you were. And if you were sitting next to those heaps of salt, oh my God, you'd be the luckiest man on earth. That's what €1,000,000 looked like back in the day. Well, I don't know, but it's certainly a lot of money.